Round 4 of the 2017 Shamkir Chess Super Tournament in memory of the one and only Vladimir Gashimov faced off Vladimir Kramnik versus Pentala Harikrishna. And boy, was it worth our time. Something that made this game an instant classic would be described as, well, I'll let somebody else say exactly what Kramnik did. That's right. He went Tau. Full-blown Tau mode. Some people say you never go full Tau, but Kramnik did it today. And it started in this exact position you see here, where I don't even have the engine running because I wanted to give you an opportunity to anticipate how you might deal with the move f5 as white. Now, one of the key things to do for yourself from an educational standpoint, assuming you might be an ambitious, trying to improve chess player, is to assess the positions that we have in these videos, not only from first-person point of view, but also taking into account the essence of the position, if you will. What we mean by that are not the X's and O's where you immediately start calculating, I go there, he goes there, I go there, he goes there. But look at the pieces, look at their activity, look at the problems, look at the weaknesses, the pawn structure. So black has played this move f5 with very, very nasty intentions to play the move f4. Not only that, when you get all of these pieces working together toward the king side, you would anticipate that black is probably going to have a pretty big initiative. The only issue with black's position, especially as might follow up with this move f5, is that the king is exposed. Now, one of the things that is the difference between players when they're just getting going versus players with some experience is that you don't just take into account whether the king is wide open now. Certainly the king isn't over on a4 or something where he's clearly naked, but he's just as potentially naked over here, even though there's still a whole lot of pawns on the board. When you have all these pieces around the king, sometimes the smoke gets in the way of seeing the bigger picture, but not for Kramnik. He recognizes that there was a chance here to go for something really interesting, a truly practical sacrifice, which is why we had Tau make an appearance already. And, well, without further ado, let's see exactly what Kramnik did. Rook takes e5. Are you kidding me, right? When was the last time we saw Kramnik sacrifice a rook? And certainly do so without a forcing combination to follow up. The obvious move here, as the computer says, and shouldn't be surprised that the engines would prefer black, they are very materialistic, is to capture back the rook. There really isn't any other option. So after captures and bishop takes with check, now we have an interesting moment where there are really three serious candidate moves. We have the top line of the engine involved here for those who really love checking everything that Danny says, the integrity of it with the engine. That's for the real chess computer nerds out there. But for those who just want to learn, let me explain to you how you might look at this position from black's perspective. So usually one of the criteria in terms of whether a sacrifice or, let's say, an unbalanced material position. I have a whole video series over on Chess.com where we talk about a piece for pawns, two rooks for a queen, a knight and bishop for a rook, all these different types of positions where the material points are equal, but the position is a mess, right? And in this case, the position is a total mess, and black is currently operating with only two pawns for the rook. Now, the factors that might tell you whether or not a sacrifice like that might work are, one, king safety. Whose king is safer, and do I have the ability to get threats against that king? In this case, white does. The other one is pawn weaknesses. Now, though white is going to need a lot of pawns to make up for the rook, after any move black plays, whether it's the move he played in the game or the move that the engine might be recommending, a move like king to g6, on any of these moves, white is going to be taking back another pawn. So now all of a sudden we have three pawns, all of them being passers, okay, for white. We have a number of very interesting, aggressive pieces placed toward the white king. And though we don't have an immediate concrete threat, there's a number of things about black's position that are less than desirable, right? The bishop on h7 seems a little out of play. These pawns are also overextended, even if they're not immediate targets. So it's interesting, right? Now don't get me wrong. Computers play these positions better than any humans because their ability to calculate really concretely, despite these things that make human beings nervous, an open king and two bishops getting nasty on the diagonals, right? These are things that don't bother a computer. They're very, very cold-blooded in their approach. But this position is not an easy one for black, and so very impressive by Kramnik to anticipate the difficulties that black might have trying to coordinate. I will note that arguably the best move for black that was not played by the Indian Grandmaster is the move king to g6. Now, the point is that after the move queen takes b5, this very nice shot, bishop to g8, immediately solving two problems I highlighted. One, the bishop on h7 was out of play. And number two, the bishop on a2 remained a very deadly piece for all kinds of weird tactics. Bishop to g8 either forces the issue of a trade, or because it gained a tempo, the idea is that a move like bishop to b1 can be met by the follow-up g4. Now, I spent some time analyzing this line to see whether or not there really was any chances for white to save the day. But the issue here is simple. The queen doesn't have any protection over the bishop like it does in one of the main lines of the game. So moving this knight, is not an option. If you move the knight, black just wins this piece. That means that white would have to trade on e4 even further in order to open up the potential for the queen on the bishop. But black denies it by taking with the pawn and not the knight. And now that forces further exchanges where the only way to save this double under fire minor pieces would have been to go for a queen trade, where we would pretty safely anticipate black should probably win. Now, there are still three pawns here for the rook. There's an obstacle bishop dynamic, and there's actually some interesting threats, like bishop to d6 to remove the knight, which defends the bishop, maybe even b4. But okay, all things considered, and you see with a nearly 3.5 point advantage, black should probably go on to win this. But note that part of the reason why we made this a Tau mode game is because part of a sacrifice is sometimes to put the pressure on your opponent and poke at all the right points that just make it that difficult for them to find the right moves. And king to g6 is a very computer move to play in the position. I mean, when I look at king to g6, I of course look at queen takes b5, but I wouldn't be surprised if Hari was also considering moves like g4, a crazy move to undermine and to open up more threats on the diagonals against the king, right? Even subtle moves like bishop back to d4, reopening the square on e5 for the knight. I might take one look at that and my mind would blow, because how am I dealing with the king here when there's an immediate threat of knight e5 check? Now, obviously, we see the computer finds bishop to g8 and knows that knight e5 is safely met by king h7, but okay, this is not easy for a human being to invite those types of tempo moves, right? A tempo move is a move that is a check, a capture, or a threat against a piece that's more valuable. And so it's not easy to play these positions as black. In chess, as much as we'd all like to make it a pure science with computers telling us how to play, it's still a game. It's a sporting event. And Kramnik did it very well here. So black did not play king to g6. There's also some analysis of rook f6 over at Chess.com's news report with Dejan Bojkov, Grandmaster Dejan Bojkov, diving into this. So go ahead and check that out if you're interested. But we're going to go forward with knight f6. Kramnik gobbled up the pawn. And then we see the truly impressive approach, starting with not just the move bishop to d4, which opens up the e5 square, also opens up the fifth rank for the queen. Note that you're down a rook here for just a few pawns, but the evaluation is only 1.3. So for all those of you sitting there thinking, wow, well, Danny's really loving white's position here, but isn't black just winning? Yeah, I guess from a points perspective, that's how computers would think about it. But from a practical point of view, and especially the criteria I gave you, how do you evaluate whether you can sacrifice or play an unbalanced material deficit? Do you have the initiative? Often an initiative is who's got threats against the king or a bunch of weaknesses, right? Do your pieces coordinate well to create threats? In this case, white certainly do that. And are there more long-term issues for your opponent than for yourself? Certainly we see that there are other issues in this position that are just not easy for black to coordinate a defense against. So again, that's why we really love Kramnik's practical choice. Now, here he pointed out that he's so confident in the unbalanced material philosophy that I'm kind of giving here that I don't need to go for checkmate right away. I just trust in the activity of my position and your weak king. Here Kramnik plays this move h3. Freeing up his back rank and even possibly preparing a further undermining of the king. Something so subtle and so pretty about that move, and that the evaluation continues to creep back in white's favor. h3, rook to b8, the queen retreats. Okay, so she's guarding this b2 pawn, no big surprise there. Now, after the move bishop to g8 comes, the difference between this and the main line I showed with king to g6 that black probably should have played is here there's no immediate threat of g4 by black to win the bishop on e5, if you remember. So, of course, Kramnik isn't going to trade. He's just going to back up the bishop. It'll find a new home and a new diagonal where it might be able to take advantage of this king down the road. That's what Kramnik did. Queen to b7 is played. Well, a simple threat deserves a simple answer. I'll play b4. Not only does this sort of remind black that, yeah, you have a rook, but I also have 3 passed pawns, and who knows what they're capable of, right? Pawns have a dynamic future that rooks don't. And so b4 is a move that protects the threat and, maybe gets that pawn a little closer to creating some damage. The move rook to e8 is played, and speaking of getting the pawns going, we have this nice move c4. One thing to note is that the follow-up by Kramnik after this move cannot be played immediately, the move queen to b2, which is very nice and puts the queen and bishop together working on this diagonal against the king, because that would allow bishop to c4. And one of the things you have to do when you've sacrificed material or you're playing an unbalanced material position is to maintain activity, maintain the initiative. That's what we've been kind of harping on here. So Kramnik plays the move c4, and it sort of laughs in the face of danger. I think that one of the reasons I wanted to pause and highlight that isn't just for the further tip about how to play unbalanced material positions, keep the initiative, but actually that after rook e8, your immediate reaction to such a move might be to find a safe square for the queen. Well, that's exactly what Hari would have wanted, right? Moving this queen would have allowed the blockade, and you start to see White's pieces struggle for the activity they need to justify the rook sacrifice. But you have to be accurate as well to play sacrifices. You have to be willing to laugh in the face of danger. Thanks, Simba. You have to be willing to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. You can't sacrifice a bunch of material and then start playing risk-free chess. By definition, you are in the lion's den, and you got to be willing to play that way. So I just like that move. Now, all Danny's philosophies aside, did I actually calculate? Is there ways to deal with these discoveries? There is. One of the biggest points after a move like knight to c3 is that after we take f6, we can now create a new threat by pinning the knight. Trading rooks on e1 would eventually lose this knight with check, and if White is only down the exchange with all of these pawns and a bunch of threats against the king, I think you can do the math. White would be happy. So the only real question in this line was, would there be some weird way for black to kind of punish White? And that move maybe starts with queen takes f3. But after takes, rook takes e1, and a very forcing series of moves, in the end, we get to highlight one more time the educational principle that I'm hoping you'll take away from this video, which is that, again, material, let's say the pieces, right? The conglomerate, the group of less valuable pieces against the one big one, whether it's minors versus the powerful rook, whether it's a bunch of rooks and minors versus the queen, the pieces need coordination, and often they need protection of each other. Are these rooks doubled together on a second rank? The answer is no, right? Are they even protecting each other on an open file or a couple of open files? The answer is no. So when you combine that lack of coordination with the potential open king, the queen always tends to do well against a conglomerate of pieces when they can combine threats of pieces and open king. Check is on one side of the board, a weak pawn on this side of the board. Those are all the things you look for when you're playing the queen, and that theory is sort of brought to the front as soon as you see the move queen to d3, which is winning on the spot, not just because it attacks this, but it also threatens the move queen to d6 check, which would be a fork of the king and rook. So I just wanted to show that critical line, that there really was no discovery for black, and that does back up what I was saying, that you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't play sacrifices and then not find accurate moves like c4, which I believe deserved an exclam. Dayon didn't give it in the analysis. But after c4, black plays queen to c6, and we get queen to b2. The pawn is much less important than us being able to continue to flex our muscles, increase the pressure against that black king. You're already seeing all kinds of threats here. The most powerful one might be a move like g4 coming in a lot of positions, which undermines the protection of the knight to allow for some serious combinations because one of its main protectors is pinned to the king. All of these things adding up had black being a little bit worried. Instead of taking the c4 pawn, tried to use all his pieces. And here Kramnik once again shows the patience of the sacrifice with the move c5. Also just super pretty. Maybe not quite as pretty as h3, but it is a move that shows you 3 passed pawns they're a pretty menacing force. It also establishes a very concrete threat. The next time a pawn pushes, it'll be doing so with a tempo, and before you know it, now we got 2 pawns on the 6th rank, which theories tell us that often 2 pawns on the 6th rank can outplay a rook because of their threat to queen. So just an all-around incredibly dynamic and awesome game here to see White playing such a patient rook sacrifice. A rook for 3 pawns is not something you see every day, but Kramnik made it work so well. After the move queen to e6, we see the move b5. Okay, it didn't come with tempo, but it is coming. And after king to f8, the move c6 comes. The truth is, at this point, the threats are mounting. c7 followed by b6. As we've highlighted, none of these pieces can really move without releasing the protection they're currently required to give to somebody else. Right, moving this knight would not only now unleash a pin, but leave this knight open. Moving this knight is likely going to allow tactics on e4, whether it be immediate or with g4. Because of that, Black tries to create counterplay with the move g4, but after captures, and finally the hammer coming down, you see the evaluation just twist. Let's do that. Let's back that up real quick, just so you can see that again. After c5, several moves of us trying to justify this sacrifice to the engine, see the whole thing flip. And if you want an instant replay, we can go back and just watch that bar just slowly change with every move, because I just love it. It just slowly is gonna slowly creep White's direction, especially after the move c4. So accurate. The move queen to c6 comes, but again, queen to b2, and here we go. The last move I guess I should highlight in fairness is what if queen a6. I did do some analysis of this. You bet your buns I did. Queen a6 is of course still recommended by the engine, but I'm still in a position to be happy to defend Kramnik's awesomely practical sacrifice. Queen to b2, not even going in for variations that involve b5. And here we'll get to see an example of what happens if you take the pawn. The move knight to e5 comes in, and after bishop to e6, the thing I was sort of highlighting in several of my talks, but you never got to see, actually appears on the board here. G4, a hammer being brought down. It's an undermining of a pawn that is sort of it's very important pawn defending this knight here. Pushing or taking would allow us to win this guy. Doing nothing is almost just as bad with threats of taking on f5. And again, you see that these are human beings playing chess. This move was about move 35 in the game. The time pressure had been setting in, and you just look at White's battery, and you just love this type of game, the kind of thing we all wish we could play. So that would have been an example of g4 coming in. But again, didn't happen. We see queen c6. We see that evaluation creep back White's way, which just makes me so happy. And as we said, finally in the game, these pawns really kind of got out of control. Black was desperate with the move g4, but here comes bishop takes e4, and really White's already winning. I mean, the material has completely switched, and after takes f6, here Black is not only is he only up the exchange, but he has no way to deal with these passed pawns and the same issues he's been dealing with this entire time, which is the weak king. Rook to d6 was played, bishop g7 check, and then bishop e5. A very cute little way to end the game. Why? Because the bishop is poisoned. Capturing it, would allow the move bishop to g6 with tempo, a discovery on the king, which allows me to win the queen. Noted should be that that's exactly why Kramnik played bishop g7 check first instead of bishop to e5 first, right? He wanted to force that king to a light square so that the move bishop to g6 could be possible in the end. And with that, as we said, Kramnik won this brilliant game against Pentala Harikrishna. Just happened. It just went down on April 24th. So this is some time-sensitive stuff, some really instructive stuff. Hopefully you have some tips you can take home about playing sacrifices or unbalanced material positions, the requirements to keep the initiative, and of course, it's just not very often we get to not only talk about Kramnik playing a sacrifice like this, but even make the comparison of him to the one and only Mikhail Tal. And with that, I will leave you with some nightmares to think about what Mikhail Tal might be thinking with that facial expression.